Hello everyone, Jules here. Today I'd like to talk about two interesting books, one about alchemy and the other one about mythology. And both of them are from a psychological perspective. And both of these books are also written by the same author. Both of these books were written by James Hillman, who was really the founder of post-Jungianism. So here is the first one, volume 5, which is about alchemy, and it's called Alchemical Psychology. And just to give you a little bit of a background about James Hillman, he was an American who was trained as a Jungian psychologist. So that's where he began with his studies and with his profession. But along the way, he became disillusioned with the way that Jungian psychology was being practiced. He found that a lot of Jungian psychologists were over-intellectualizing the therapy. So he actually founded the post-Jungian movement. But he actually referred to it as archetypal psychology. And he wanted his own type of archetypal psychology to be used as a supplement to Jungian psychology. So it wasn't to replace Jungian psychology, but it was a preferred or better method in his view, because he wanted to work more with the actual soul. He felt that the soul was being taken out of Jungian psychology and too much emphasis on the intellectual approach. So I just wanted to give you that background to start with. And James Hillman is one of my favourite Jungian or post-Jungian psychologists. I must admit that I have read Jungian books and the collected works of Carl Jung over many years, but for me, the books of James Hillman have become more relevant and more important for me personally, because I have found them more practical to apply to issues in my own life. I actually prefer the work of James Hillman now. Okay, I'll say a bit more about that as we go along, but this is the book on alchemical psychology. It's part of the collected works of James Hillman. This is volume 5, and it's a hardcover book. It's been published in recent years. It's relatively easy to get. You'll pay a little bit more for this type of book because it is a hardback. It is a hardcover, but it's very well produced and presented. It's not too expensive, but it's a little bit more expensive than a paperback. And these collected works are only available in hardcover. There are no diagrams or illustrations in this book. It's all different chapters, but it is so well written that you don't really need diagrams or illustrations in here. I think for anyone who is familiar with Jungian psychology, ideas and concepts, you should be able to read these books. So I've written down a few points here that I want to talk about in regard to what is in each of these books. So the Alchemical Psychology, what this book is about is James Hillman talks about in different chapters the therapeutic value of alchemical language and concepts. So anyone who knows anything about alchemy in general would be able to look at the stages of alchemy in a different way, because usually alchemy is quite an esoteric subject, and a lot of people would not necessarily think about that from a psychological perspective in regard to their own issues. So I really like this idea of applying a therapeutic, alchemy as therapy, as a type of therapy or as a kind of psychological reflection in regard to the different stages of alchemy. And it's also the stages of alchemy in regard to soul development. Different stages of our lives. And that was the other thing that set James Hillman apart. He was all about soul development, and he actually called it soul making. So his approach was that all of us don't really have a soul per se in regard to the religious approach of having a soul. His approach was that every individual is in process of soul making as we live our lives during our life process. So I really like that too. That has become really quite relevant for me in recent years. And that's another reason why I really like James Hillman. I really love his approach, because it has been really relevant and helpful to me. And it still is. It still is. It has so many applications. So this is volume 5. It's called Alchemical Psychology, in regard to the different stages of alchemy. This was published in 2014, so it's fairly recent. And it's absolutely worth getting for the reasons that I mentioned. It's not only for people who are interested in alchemy as a subject, but if you want to find out about this in regard to a psychological and particularly Jungian psychology approach. It's 345 pages, and this is volume 5, and it's worth getting if you would like to find out about alchemy in that way, from a psychology approach, but particularly from a Jungian psychological approach. It's really worth thinking about. The next book is about mythology. This is volume 6 of the collected works of James Hillman, and this one is called Mythic Figures, because it's about mythology, Greek mythology, in regard to Jungian psychology, and particularly his personal post-Jungian psychology. And we are living in a post-modern age, so I think post-Jungian psychology is the way to go. I find that Jungian psychology is great for theory. There is great insight in the theories and concepts. There is. But I find that post-Jungian ideas and concepts are more relevant and helpful for people now, especially with the emphasis on the soul rather than a general intellectualization of all of the different terms and aspects. Anyway, this is the Mythic Figures book. It's about the same length as the other one, as the one I just showed you. It's about 340 pages. And I will talk about some of the chapters that are in this book as well. So the mythic figures from Greek mythology, these are the gods and goddesses: Dionysus, Athena, Aphrodite, Hermes, Orpheus, Apollo, and Zeus. These are the particular gods and goddesses that there's a chapter on each one, and these are all in relation to common personal issues, which is really helpful. A lot of people may know the wisdom of myth through the different stories, but may not have thought about these myths in relation to common personal issues and how they can throw insight on that. And the other thing I really like about this book is that James Hillman had a rethinking of light and shadow. So we all know about the shadow, which was the concept that was particularly created by Carl Jung, which is where the whole idea of shadow work comes from. But James Hillman had a rethinking. He formulated a rethinking of light and shadow. And by that, he felt that both the light and the shadow have value and insight. And he also thought that each was contained in the other. So there is shadow in light and light in shadow. That's very original. And he thought that they were contained in each other but hidden. That's why people are not so aware of those things. So yet again, this is another really original, thought-provoking and insightful approach to mythology, and just as the book on alchemical psychology is. So this is the Mythic Figures book, volume 6 of collective works of James Hillman. I really love these books. I particularly follow the work of James Hillman because it's been of such benefit for me, and it continues to be of great benefit for me. But I wanted to show these books today for people who are interested in looking at alchemy or mythology from a psychological perspective, and for people who are interested in Jungian psychology, but also for people who are not aware of the work of James Hillman, and especially post-Jungianism. Because I'm not so sure that a lot of people know about post-Jungianism, which is the Jungianism that came after Carl Jung and his Jungian psychology. But as I was saying, James Hillman saw himself as an unofficial founder of that movement, and he personally regarded this as archetypal psychology. That's what he called it. But he really was the first post-Jungian. So I wanted to talk about that today, and I wanted to show those two books. Again, with the mythic figures, there's no drawings or illustrations in this book as well. It's not that type of book, but there are so many images that are written into the writing that, you know, it's rich with imagery in the way that these books are written. So I'll put some details below the video, and I hope you enjoyed finding out about these books today. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.